All right. Well, welcome, Jeremy. I appreciate you being willing to fit us in here. I know you all got a lot going on there at Kentucky State University, but I know there's been several people that have asked about a drone um, talk. And so I thought this would be a great time as people are thinking about what they're going to do for spring and into the growing season to maybe hit a few highlights. And with that, I'll turn it over to you and say welcome and thanks for coming out. So.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much for having me. This is half of what we do is just getting out in the public and sharing what we're doing. And just like what I just worked out with Mr. Sizemore, getting out to y'all's properties, and doing these demonstrations out at your place, and then using your material as the examples is just one way that we share all this stuff. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I have so many slides. I have about 60 prepared. I'm prepared to talk at y'all for the full 90 minutes if that's what we want to do. Now I had invited 2 additional people. Caleb Canning, he is in the drone business. He does a lot of spraying. I'm going to talk a little bit about spraying, but we're still new and learning all that. But this is his main business. But he had to leave the country. And wasn't able to make it today. And Spencer Hines, I'm expecting he may log in at any minute. He works at a surveying and engineering firm, and they use drones to make survey stuff. So if you're going to buy some property, or you're going to build a factory, or build a road, this is what those guys do. And they're like the highest end of the drone use stuff. And then Spencer himself, he is an Army vet as well. So he was excited to get the invite to this. I'm guessing he got caught up out in the field. So if he logs in at any time and I don't notice, if somebody could just say so, then we'll just let him talk wherever I'm at. But so the title for today, Applied Geospatial Technology for Land Management. Now, I work at KSU, and farms and forest are our 2 kind of main topics, and this technology is all about characterizing the landscape. And I have just 1,000 examples that I'm about to fly through and just kind of give you the full tour of basically everything that we've been doing in the last 12 months. I have a little bit from each project stuck in here. And if you have any questions at any time as we're going through this, if any example really speaks to you, just blurt it out right there, because it's not so important that I get to all the slides here, because it's kind of the same approach, just over and over again. So if you see something that speaks to you and something that you're doing, stop me and we can talk about that a little more. In the past, I've been at KSU since 2015, and I came on as a STEM coordinator. So my focus really up until this year has mainly been research and education, so working with young people. And we do the same kind of work, but the idea has been to teach the students how to do it, so that after they graduate college, they can get a job doing drone stuff and GIS, remote sensing, and I'm going to explain what those things are. But the industry as a whole is just booming. I mean, just in East Kentucky, from the bridge work, from the floods recently, there is so much activity out there right now, and the drones and the other kind of geospatial technology is just a key part of kind of monitoring that progress both before and after the projects. So it's really hot. So if there's young folks that aren't sure what they want to do, this definitely is something that they need to be aware of. And part of this is doing a lot of outreach and trying to connect with all the different agencies and the private folks that have the need for the people who do geospatial work. And really that's been my job the last several years, is just, doing projects with folks. So if we were to go out to Mr. Sizemore's property, we probably would find a couple of undergraduates and graduate students to drag out there with us. And they get to learn more about kind of the cooperative extension mission of helping folks, and they get the hands-on experience of actually doing a project that's going to answer some questions. So Yeah, my dogs are going to be wild in the back, so I hope that doesn't bother us. So geospatial technology or geospatial data, you've probably seen this all over the place. There's so many apps and so much data out there. GIS is basically just layers of data that describe everything about the physical world that can be replicated in this way. So this little example shows different layers that represent everything: the streets, the parcels, the land use, elevation, and 1,000 other things, soil types, and just everything you can imagine. And generally the idea is you can make a map project that completely represents the real world in this kind of data. So before I would go out to Mr. Sizemore's property, I would have a pretty good idea of the context that it sits in. And then further from satellite data, I can even tell kind of what's been going on at the property, for the last 30 years or so. And so next to GIS is this science called remote sensing. And remote sensing is basically what you do with your eyes when you use your sight to look around. So when you look outside and you see stuff, what you're seeing is reflected sunlight off of the surface. So that light reflects off the grass and the trees and goes into your eyes, and your brain stitches that basically into an image. And remote sensing is basically that same way too. The camera in your iPhone and my RGB drone are basically the same thing. The drone is basically just a flying camera. And you're basically taking pictures, and pictures document the real world. But we also have a lot of fancy sensors, some of which I'll share, that can sense energy in the non-visible spectrum, particularly the near infrared. And that's where a lot of the action is when you're measuring plant health and tree health. And a lot of my examples here that'll follow will really show that. And how would you be able to extract vegetation health and condition just using light? This little image here kind of shows that. If you look on the left-hand side, that's just a little cross section of some generic plant material. But the point being illustrated there are that the different bands of light, that is the different colors, react with the plant in different ways. Okay, so we know that plant materials use sunlight to do photosynthesis. Okay, but the plants prefer the red and the blue light. So as this diagram shows, that's the energy that's generally available for photosynthesis. So if a plant is doing lots of photosynthesis, we call it healthy, right? And then if something happens to start retarding that photosynthesis process, then we would call it less healthy. And basically just measuring the proportion of total light reflected versus how much of the red and blue is absorbed, we can generate these real simple vegetation index, as is shown here on the far right side. So a high index means a lot of health, and a low index means less health. Now, exactly where this level should be is going to be different for all your different crops, and at different points in the growth cycle. So when we're at a new site, these numbers may not exactly, the exact number may not mean a whole lot. But when putting in context and you're looking at relative differences, it starts to show you a lot. And again, some of my examples here will make that a little more clear. So it's all in the sensors. So you'll hear me say RGB a lot. And what I mean by RGB, I mean exactly the kind of image that your iPhone takes. So when you snap a picture with your iPhone, it is recording red, green, and blue light. So it's actually making 3 images at a time, and those images overlaying show you the natural color image that you're used to seeing. Okay. This little sensor here, this is an agriculture sensor. This is one of the early ones. It's really, really simple. And on the left-hand side here, this is a picture of near infrared light. And I can't go over all the details, but the way that the plants reflect this light, as the plant gets more healthy, it's going to reflect a lot more near infrared light. And as a rule, water will very fiercely absorb this near infrared energy. So in this field, you can see those that standing water that's in there. It appears almost black, and that's because none of the near infrared energy that falls on that water surface is reflected, because the water is absorbing, all of it. But on the right, you calculate that NDVI index, and what you see here, where it's more green, the photosynthetic level is much higher, right? So as the crops are growing and getting more vigorous here, we can essentially track how much photosynthesis they're doing. So you can see here, you could monitor your individual plots and even have some variation shown within each plot. And that's a little sensor that's attached to the back of my drone. And more traditionally, we can use satellite data to do the exact same thing. And this has been around like literally since the 70s. All these satellites, there's just hundreds of them up there, always watching the world, just like a movie. So if we needed to, we could track literally every farm in the county. Not as in high resolution as the drones can, but here very well, you can see what's going on in the fields and even see the variation within the field. So this is basically how we, how we can track over time. So what I'm going to do now is give you a bunch of examples. So I'm not a scientist, but I work with a lot of scientists. They will have bona fide research questions about how well a certain soil type is for a certain kind of hemp or sunflower. And they may, here on the left-hand side, that's like a little map that just shows you 2 or 3 of their fields or plots, and they're color-coded according to the type of crops that's there. And what we would do, they would have a question about how well these things are growing in the different soil. So as an easy example, let's say they plant in May, and then in June, I'm out there with the drone and I fly it for time 1, and I basically make a map of the real-time photosynthetic activity. So in this image, the greenest areas have your highest level of photosynthetic activity, and the orange areas are not doing any photosynthesis at all, okay? So say a month later, I come back and I fly again, right? And I make exactly the same map. So time 1, time 2, and I can take the difference between the two and simply calculate what the change was over the 30 days. So that's what this difference image is here on the right-hand side. That shows, real time, time 1, real time, time 2, and then, what is the difference over the course of the 30 days. So for the organic people who care about these plots, that would inform them, how well the crops are doing. And then maybe more importantly, even within each little plot, you can see the variation, right? So like one end here is looking better than the other end. And again, as the drone people, we may not be able to make any sense of this at all, but for the people who care about the crop, it informs them how well things are going. And then that, of course, can be aggregated to the plots. And here's just a statistical representation of what you see in the previous image. At the same time, so if that's photosynthetic or plant health, okay? This image is slightly different. This image is a digital terrain model, and it basically tries to recreate exactly the ground. So from time 1 to time 2, this is an indication of how much it's grown height-wise. So think about a field. You want to know how quickly the grass is growing. You could fly at time 1 and time 2 and calculate that volume. And then here on the far right side, that's the difference. So in 1 month, that's how much some of that stuff grew. So what is it? Some of that hemp, you see it jumped up almost 7 feet in just that little bit of time. I think this is actually more than a 30-day time lapse, but I'm just saying for example. And again, that too can be converted into this more statistical representation here, just showing time 1 and time 2. So another example, so I heard some of you guys were into sheep and ruminants. Just a quick plug, Thursday is third Thursday thing at the KSU farm, and small ruminants is the topic. So they're gonna be talking about goat stuff and a lot about grass. So if you don't have anything to do next Thursday, I'd love to have you out at the farm, feed you lunch and all that. So in our case, what we were doing, the goat people out here, I don't know if y'all been out to the KSU farm before. It's a big, beautiful 300-acre plus property, and we have this big, nice convention center right in the middle of it. And back behind it, they have these several acres. And if you could see all these individual little plots here, these are their different paddocks. And one thing that they've been doing is trying to figure out what the best rotational strategies are, okay? So you don't want to leave the goats on any particular plot for too long because they'll chew the grass down too much. But you don't want to move them too fast either. And maybe you're not quite sure how long you should leave them, right? So that was the question being answered here, is over the course of a few years, as they exercise this rotational strategy, what is the overall impact to the grass, right? So in terms of how healthy it is or how vigorous it's growing, okay? So they basically asked us, could we track this over time with the drone, okay? And this little image on the left, that's a real shot of the farm there. And this little display that it shows with the drone moving, that's what it looks like when you fly a farm. So we have a simple little app. I just have to kind of draw the boundary of your property, and the drone just flies a back and forth pattern, collects hundreds of images that are all 80 or 90% overlapping, and then the software will stitch that into what we call an ortho mosaic. That is exactly what Google Earth is, right? So, but they're generally taking them from a plane, much higher and larger images, but it's still basically the same thing, just image, 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 overlapping. The software stitches it all together, and you have, you know, one big image. And we can do that, as is shown here, multiple times. So in this course, I've just showed kind of like, you know, one example from each of the 4 years that we did this. And then here on the left, this is a close-up of these individual paddocks here. And these numbers, I don't know how to interpret them, but this in some way inscribes what the rotational strategy was. So we fly the drone, okay, and there's all kinds of things that we can do with that. So we create this. I'm about to show you in a second what the health looks like in real time. But an extra thing that we're able to do is look at the area that's all outside of that colored image. Normally at most farms, you look out there, and if the farm is doing good, it's like it's all green, right? All green. So so it kind of looks like it's all the same material. But when you do this little trick called HSV model, it kind of segregates the various colors that are in the scene. And where on this right-hand image, where you see colors that are the same, that means they share precisely the same spectral properties. That is, they are the same color, they're absorbing light at the same rate, right? So they're basically different species. So where the nice healthy field looks all green, when you convert it into this model, you can see the variation of the different grasses. So where you see the different splotches of different color, these are areas that are dominated by some particular grass type, right? And like if you look at the bottom there, I forget. They're not single species. They're all really mixtures, but they're dominated by particular species. And if you look there on the bottom of there, that really stands out. So over time, if that particular species is like spreading out in the field, this is an easy way to track that. And in fact, that's one of the things alongside of their rotational management strategy. They're also doing all kinds of things to try to change what the species distribution is of the grasses that are growing. So that's kind of a secondary thing they were interested in is, how is the grass kind of evolving over time? And this is just a close-up showing you where, for each of the different colors, you just go out into the field and see what's there, right? So it's either different, dominated by different species of grass, or it could be, the same kind of species, but they're at different points in the life cycle, okay? And then this is that same plot, but it's been converted into that vegetation index, again, based on kind of the fraction of absorbed red light, divided by the total light that's there, normalized difference. And these are actually two different indices here. The one on the right is based on RGB only, and then this NDVI over here is a little more sophisticated. But the point is that they basically both show the same distribution of health, though the one on the right's a little sharper. And that's in real time, right? That's only at the time the drone flew. Okay. And it's just a little chart comparing them, just showing that they basically say the same thing. And then for each plot, you aggregate all the pixels there. So each individual little pixel, right? Each pixel is some square area of ground, and that's the health of the grass that falls in it. That's converting it into kind of a statistical representation, these little box plots, so you can track like over the years how the overall health is changing. And of course, this is important in in a rotational sense, because they're literally growing money out of the ground, right? For cows or for ruminants or whatever, this is the food, right? So that's why you would want to keep track over that. And then what we could do further is, for every season, we would fly like every 2 or 3 weeks, right? So those little images I showed you, one from each year, we actually have every couple of weeks, a new one. So for 2018, we may have had 10 for the whole growing season. In 2019, got the whole growing season. And then, when you have all this data, you can basically aggregate it over the entire time. So this is basically a map that shows over the 4 years, as they do their different rotational strategies, this is the net impact over the 4 years. So where you see the dark greens, that is where there's a lot more grass that's doing a lot more photosynthesis. And where you see the orange and pinks, it is, it's down. So that's, this is basically the answer that we provided for them is, based on your strategies. And this is what the data tells us about how the grass is changing over time. And I can tell you, they were very, very happy here, because they, of course, they had some idea of what to expect for the various plots. They didn't share that with us ahead of time, but once we delivered these results, it basically fit with what they had understood had been happening, over time. So for pastures, this is it. And pastures is probably, the biggest use for most of the farms I go to anyway. There's more pasture out there than anything. So yeah, so that's the pasture example. All right, this is sorghum. Okay, this is sorghum. This is not my project. This is Dr. Chilyawal. He's a new doctor at KSU, and He's also very interested in GIS, remote sensing type stuff, and he works very closely now with Dr. Sean Lugas in the organic thing. Quickly, I'll just share his analysis. This is all sorghum, and every column that you see, I hope that's clear, every column that you see is a different genetic variety of sorghum. And then every vertical position is a different planting date, okay? Now, they may not be in order, okay? They may not be in order, but each vertical slot is a different planting date. The question here was they're trying to figure out the best genetic variety and the optimal planting date. And this is a way to track them. So this is probably 2-3 months into the sorghum growing. Well, depending on what date it was, but here you can basically tell at what level it is, right? So if it's peak performance or or less performance, they're trying to attribute that to which genetic varieties grow better and what is the optimal planting date to get the most sorghum or the most healthy sorghum. Again, I'm not super familiar with what exactly they were hoping for, but this is another example of just how they're tracking what's happening in the field. All right, so a forestry example. This is Cold Springs Park, Frankfort, Kentucky, and this is an invasive species project, and what they're wanting to know first was what is the extent of the bush honeysuckle that is growing in the understory, okay? And this little area here in the middle, this is their primary study area, and then each of these colored areas that you see, these forest experts have walked through here, and red indicates some forest structure that is appropriate for a certain mitigation strategy. That is to go in there and get rid of the bush honeysuckle. So like if it's a very low invasive species infestation, you might be able to go in there with, I don't know, a machete or something and just chop the stuff out of there. Say the green or the yellow might be kind of next level up, right? So maybe it requires more effort, like chainsaws and more men or whatever, and so forth. So the idea here was it took them hours and hours and hours out in this little small 12-acre area to basically designate these different forest characteristics. And then they provided this map, and the question was, could we use the drones, fly the drones, to basically use machine learning methods to first interpret what they must have meant when they drew these zones? Because remember, we're not forestry people, and we have no idea what they were thinking when they decided red is red should be red, and what condition should be blue and all that. But the question was, can we ascertain that, right, and then repredict these? If that doesn't make sense, it's okay. I'm gonna walk through it real quick. And this is also me advertising now our LiDAR drone. So the drones I was showing you before, those are drones that are measuring reflected sunlight. This drone is a little bit different. It has essentially a laser rangefinder that shoots about 250,000 points a second. 240,000 points a second. And all it's doing is shooting lasers, measuring how long it takes that light to hit the surface and come back, and it's just calculating the distance for one single point. But if you do that enough times, so for this is still Cold Springs Park. This is about, I think it's something like 700 million points. And this basically is a total reconstruction of the physical world that's out there. And it may look a little grainy here because this is a screenshot, But if we have time at the end, I can actually open the software and let you see what it looks like, right in the software. But you see, you can make out the total volume of everything that's out there. Okay, and you mostly can do this in Google Earth too. If you just kind of look down, the problem with Google Earth though is that you're really only kind of seeing what's at the top. So if there's a thick canopy and there's stuff under there, you're not going to see that in Google Earth. And this is the same images, just looking at intensity. I left this in here just to show you you can see here there's kind of a, this was last year in January when this image was taken. So this is mostly leaf off conditions early in the leaf off season. You see some of the trees, they still have the leaves there, but they're clearly brown and dead. And there's a lot of evergreen out there. And then this is just an intensity map. And what it's showing is that the different species of trees, they'll just reflect the light very differently. And that is evident here. So with no work at all, you can almost have a map of what your species distribution is. And if somebody would label some of those for me, then I would know what they are. And everywhere that shares exactly the same color, it's because it's the same species. A pine tree and a leafless deciduous tree will never look the same because they simply do not reflect light in the same way, okay? So this is zoomed in to that area, and this is still those LiDAR points, but they've been aggregated into basically a Google Earth style map. So something that mimics an orthomosaic, okay? And again, these are those areas. They're kind of different forests. So here you can kind of get an idea of what the context is there, and what the setup is. And remember what they're trying to get at. The forest has a certain condition, but the bush honeysuckle is kind of spread out here, and this is all about deciding which mitigation efforts are most appropriate for each of those areas. And so we can further aggregate that data and create the canopy map. So this is basically a map of all of your trees that are out there. Okay, and this is a very common product. They do this all over the place, looking at forest and deforestation, and you use this style data, and you literally can see every limb, every tree. So if we wanted to count the trees, well, here's the data to do that. Okay, but they're interested, the forest people in this project, they're interested in what's happening under the canopy. So I can peel back what's on top and only look at what's on the bottom. And I got another image that's going to show that a little bit better. But if this is the canopy, this is the tree canopy on top, this is the understory canopy, okay? So where you see the colors all bunched up, that's where you have a bunch of big bushes, and it's almost all bush honeysuckle. And then in the areas where it's perfectly clear under there, right, you can make that out too. So where you see a lot of white space, that's because that's the forest under there, and there's nothing there. So you got a big nice canopy under there, and then the forest floor is just nice and clean. So this is basically, if you wanted to know the extent of bush honeysuckle understory, that's it. And this is, I just wanted to show this example because it's the most common thing that you really do with LiDAR data is extract out the bare ground. So if this is the tree canopy, but I can strip the top back, and this is the under canopy, and I can even strip that back, and this is only the bare ground. So imagine you have an erosion problem or something, and you want to know at what rate material is moving. Well, 2 drone flights, you calculate the digital terrain model. It's basically the bare earth. And if it changes between flights, like if one of these gullies elongates or widens out or whatever, you'll see that. And this is just a close-up example of just one little piece of that LiDAR. You can here on the left, these are just any range of statistics, because there's a long history of forestry people doing remote sensing. So again, I'm not a trained forestry, but I just went into the literature and was able to find like 50 or 60 different metrics that the forest people use to describe the condition of the forest, and these are those. And we can talk about these in particular if somebody's super interested in them, but they basically just give you 100 different ways to describe, you know, what you're seeing in a quantitative kind of way. And you know, on the right here, that's just a little cube of the data, and just look at the detail. I mean, you see the tree, you see the limbs, and as I was saying earlier, I can peel back what's on top. So this is like just the bottom couple of feet, right? And then I have this whole other range of statistics that can describe that. Now, which of these are most meaningful to the forestry people is yet to be determined, okay? So the machine learning aspects of it, the more layers you can create, the better, because it just gives you more opportunity to see difference. And that's ultimately what we use to recreate the zones. But again, the main point here is just to show how you can peel the different layers back. Different part of the forest, but the point here is just a different kind of canopy model. A different kind of canopy model that can be used to segregate or segment each of the individual trees. So if we go out to your farm, maybe you're interested, you know, how many trees do I have? Well, boom, this is how you count them. So you see they're all kind of uniquely identified. They have an ID number. And while this may not be a perfect model, there's a lot of little mistakes in here that I could point out. It's pretty noisy, but it hasn't been processed that much. But it gives you a rough number of how many trees you have. And I could couple this with that spectral information we were looking at earlier, the different intensities of how they reflect the light, and start to narrow down what trees these are, right? Because the pine's going to look different than the deciduous, and all the pine's going to look the same, and all the same species of deciduous, they're going to look the same. So, you know, in your forest, maybe you got 12 different kinds of trees. We make a map like this, you pick out, you know, label the 12 kinds of trees, and anywhere that I see that same signature, I know that it must be that same kind of tree. So this is relatively straightforward. Very, very long history of this in GIS. This is your basic kind of land cover classification. But because our drones are so high resolution, we can see very small differences between stuff that ordinarily would be hard to tell apart. And so this is a little weird. This is that same cube of data, and it's just everything I've showed you up to now is basically aggregated down to a 2D map, right? A 2D map, flat map. And here, this is just illustrating how I can create these estimates at every vertical level, okay? At every vertical level. And this one's kind of a hard one to grasp, but so you see 3 pictures here, and these are 3 different conditions in the forest, right? So again, maybe one of these was the blue, and another one of these would be the orange, say, right? And in the data, you're trying to just explain what the differences are between these, not in a way that's meaningful yet for the foresters, but just in terms of the data, how many different ways can I describe what's going on in each of these scenes? And these little images in the top left, just they kind of show what the structure is. So the little grays there, these are open areas, but they're covered, and the euphotic light, these are the upper parts of the canopy that receive lots of light, and then you have this oligophotic that is just considerably less light because it's shaded, but it's still receiving a lot of light. And then you have your gaps, right? So as this forest structure changes just a little bit, you could imagine these little boxes kind of move around and capture that. So if you have an open space and then a tree grows in to fill it, it'll basically change its color. So over the lifetime of a forest, over say 10 years or something, you want to know how it's evolving. These little images are perfect for that, right? Perfect for that. So we take all that information that I just showed you. This is another on the left. This basically, the colors are different, but this is essentially that map that I showed you at the very beginning of this forest example where you had the red and the blue and the orange. These are those same zones that are marked. So this was basically the training data that we gave it. This is the only training data that we got from the foresters. On the right-hand side, this is what my model was able to recreate using all those different data layers that I just showed you. You just use all that information, and the whole machine learning gig is just to say, okay, what is the difference statistically between the initial classes, right? And then it's there's some mathematical formula that describes how that data varies for the different classes. And then the model basically tries to repredict it according to the model. And you see that it recreated their initial classes with about 75% accuracy, which is pretty good. So what that means, we've trained it on these 12 acres, but if I give it new forest, it can then ascertain whether or not any of these new areas match their original labels. So the point of kind of making the classification model based on their Cove Springs zones was so you basically could go to a new forest and not have to take that day-long journey to make the zones, because the models would be able to recognize what they are. That's the dream anyway. And you see it only recreated the same space for 75%. So it'd probably do worse with a forest that it's never seen, because the new forest may not be represented at all. But over time, it's going to get a lot better. So that's kind of a weird one. So I'll give you two examples. I gave you some farm examples, and I gave you some forestry examples. And these are just how we can, with no question, just go out to a farm or forest and characterize what's there. What is out there? What is the condition of it? How healthy is it? Okay, so I can answer those questions even if I have no idea what they're doing with the land. Okay, and all of that is to then, provide this information so that they can then do whatever the next step is. Okay, and a big thing that we're moving into now is using these spray drones to mitigate. So, and we're brand new to this, so there's a lot of questions I can't answer yet, particularly as it involves the actual chemicals that are being used. But we make these maps that show the health, okay? And if some part of the farm field, if the photosynthetic level is really low, then you have a problem there, okay? And a lot of time the farmers may know it, maybe it's a dry spot or maybe it holds too much water. But if it's something like a pest, you would be able to see that. And then moving forward, we will be able to send spray drones where it's appropriate to spray herbicide or fumigates, or whatever the different chemicals are that farmers apply to the different parts of the field. You would first need to make a map of the condition. And again, the drone person, we have no idea what it should be, right? So this has to be done in really intense consultation with whoever's in charge of the land out there. But let's just assume that you know, the spray drone is needed out there to go and spray chemical or fertilizer or spread seed or whatever. We make a map, we see what we have. Now we can send these drones out. Okay, so this is a DJI, this is a T10. I'm also going to show you a T30, and I think we got a T40 on the way. And these things just get bigger and bigger. This thing is already huge, but the next one I'm going to show you is even larger. So it just has 4 sprayers, and this has a 8-liter tank on it. And how you use a spray drone and all the drones actually is very, very easy. Most of them come with these smart controllers, or you can use an iPad or your phone or whatever, and you download the app and you just draw out the area that you're interested in. And for the spray drone, you have to give it a little more information, but then it will essentially figure out the best route, the most efficient method to carry out whatever you've asked it to do. So in this example here, this is something that's being applied to the whole field. But the dream is to say that maybe you only need to spray here and there and there. So you would make your map, and then you could kind of take that map and then figure out where to send your spray drone. And spray drone's very cool. It's got a lot of little radars and stuff on it, and you draw out your area, and as it flies, it's kind of keeping track of how high above the ground it is and at what rate it's spraying, and keeping track of that. And in addition to the spraying, it has a different unit that you can put in it, and this is more of a dry spreader. So whether it's pellets or hard fertilizer or maybe even seeds, I'm not sure how extensively this can be used for all the different things that are dry that you may want to spread, but the products are everyday new stuff coming online. And this is the next size up. So this is the T30. So where that previous one is 4 rotors and 4 sprayers, this thing has 8 rotors and a maximum of 16 sprayers. This is a 30-liter guy. And it's got some other specs on here too about how fast it could discharge that flow. And of course, all that stuff can be controlled and set. But the idea is that it can hopefully do it in a much more efficient route, especially for smaller farms. So we work a lot in East Kentucky, and you know, just imagine the difference between the farms that are in, you know, far East Kentucky versus far West Kentucky. You know, 6 acres versus 6,000 acres. So, you know, the larger farms, maybe this doesn't make much sense, but for smaller farms or really kind of complicated configurations, this makes a lot of sense. Okay, but there is a lot still that goes into this, and there's one of the people that we invited today who couldn't make it. This is actually his business. So he's in Central Kentucky. I forget the name of his company. I'll share that in a minute. This is what he does, and I believe this is the unit that he has too. This T30. But the drone can use a lot less chemical. I'm about to show you some numbers, but it's also more effective because when you say you're walking through the field and you're doing backpack spraying, you have a wand and you're spraying and it falls onto the crop just like the rain does. But with the drone, what it does is the thrust is pushing it down and creating like this vortex. So the chemical is being dispersed more, and it's being applied to both sides of the leaves, right? So it's more effective. This is an image I stole offline. This is a much bigger, older unit, but it shows very clearly that kind of vortex thing. And this really ends up being key. Our T10 drone spray drone versus the T30, the size difference is pretty big. The how big? 13 kilograms versus 26, so it's double the weight. Okay, double the weight, double the size. That means also that it has double this vortex kind of approach. And the impact of that is this right here. So the drones go out and spray the field, and then you go out in the field and collect some of the leaves, put them under near ultraviolet light, and you can basically see exactly what kind of coverage you got. And the study that this was pulled from, they were trying to judge how low of a rate of chemical could you spread to still have the efficacy required to do the job. And in this one, they compared it wasn't a T10 and T30, but they were very similar. So you had one large spray drone, and then they had another drone that was basically twice its weight, right? Like twice the weight. And then they wanted to compare the spray patterns for those to the backpack spray. And to get the same efficacy, these numbers here show how much chemical. So the value given in this study for the backpack sprayer, which was kind of their control, is 140 liters per hectare. Hectare is roughly 2.5 acres. And I think it's roughly 2 liters in a gallon or so. So I don't know how typical this might be for the farms around here, how comparable it is. But what they found here was that the larger drone with a slightly higher chemical flow rate it did a better job of maintaining consistency of the drops that were sprayed. Okay, and basically used about 25% of the chemical to do the same job that the backpack sprayer did. So the savings in chemical, depending on how expensive this stuff might be, the savings in chemical to do the same job might be dramatic. If you're using 25% of the chemical to do the same job, does that justify, getting into the spray drones? Don't have an answer for you yet, but that's what we're looking at. These are just kind of statistical representations of what I just shared in the picture. So I won't really spend much time on them. Okay, changing gears one more time. Remember, the drone, for the most part, is a flying camera. Okay, it's just a flying camera.
Hey, Jeremy, if I could real quick, I just wanted to add something to the spray drone piece that you were talking about.
Please.
So I actually own a spray drone company here in Western Kentucky, and the new T40 they're working on. So you're talking about the AI, the artificial intelligence that you're working on mapping out, and when it sees one conifer, it knows that's a conifer and sees it across there. They're working on the same stuff with the Mavic 3 Enterprise, where that algorithm sees that invasive species and it can relay that information to that T40 that is following it and tell it this is what's here and that is where it sprays. So you can spot spray with much better consistency and in a lot less chemicals as well. So if you're doing your algorithms that is showing, hey, this is this invasive species that's here, and your T40 is loaded with that chemical to spray for that, then it just follows in tandem and will spray what the other one is seeing based off the algorithms you're talking about building with Mr. Sizemore's cherry trees, peach trees, whatever those are. So it can identify good and bad. And once you guys are, as you're building that algorithm, that's what it's eventually going to, is to allow that T40 to spot spray. And the biggest difference, so when you say T30, that means it has a 30 liter carrying capacity. T40 has a 40-liter carrying capacity. T10, 10-liter, obviously. But on the T40, instead of it being a pressurized pump system, it is a non-pressurized system, and it used centrifugal, I can't say the word, centrifugal discs. So it is, the atomization is much more controlled, so you can get your droplet size. So a much higher percentage of your atomization happens with a consistency that also reduces drift, because a lot of times we want to turn the pressure on those sprayers up, which makes a finer mist because the atomization is happening over pressure. So now you get a little more drift. When we don't pressurize it and we use those centrifugal discs to kind of cut it up, and you can control so much more of that droplet size, you get much more consistency across the entire droplet of everything coming out of the drone. And it really kind of helps with the spot spraying in those particular areas. You were using the example in the forest. If it's invasive species and you're going to spray it, you're going in there with just what you want in the area you want, and you're spraying exactly on those. And you're right, it's all coming off of the data that you're finding out and getting consistent across the areas based off the different vegetation.
So you're describing using both of these drones at the same time.
So you can use them at the same time, or you can fly one, map the whole area, get your data, and then you're processing your data, and you come back and you're like, hey, this is where this invasive species is at. And then you go right behind it. And then I fly one drone and I do the mapping just like you do, come back, I look at it enough to get the data right there. And then I go spray those spots where it's at. So I can tell you what it's at day one. And then in 30 days, when I go back, I can tell you what the chemicals we put on it has done or not done. And then on that T40, it has a 115-pound dry matter container, which is going big into cover crops. Plant a lot of cover crops with those. As far as, dry fertilizer and spreading some of those things, it just doesn't make much sense. I mean, we're not out here liming 100-acre fields with a 115-pound capacity, because we'll never get there.
Right.
But we're talking about overseeding cover crops, or doing some of those things that you can use the rotor wash to blast that cover crop seed down in the ground before you ever harvest the original crop, is another thing they're doing some studies on now. So there are a ton of things that go into those spray zones that the data you guys are producing in this part you're talking about leading up to this is all feeding into how we can make those spray drones more efficient.
Man, we would love to come visit and see you in action out there.
So we are starting up, man. It's definitely something I'd like to work with. We got a few soldiers that are coming through the program now to get some training and getting their license and stuff. So it is something we're building out of necessity. There's a gap between the average age of a farmer being 62 years old and the technology that's coming out right now. We got farmers in Western Kentucky that won't even put auto steer on their tractors. You know what I mean? So it's a gap we're bridging with soldiers. But yeah, that is where what you're building is leading to. That's the so what of where it's going, is just the forestry, but also the, reducing input costs for farmers on the ground.
Okay, so right now we're on the outside looking in on this thing. So we man, please let us come work with you and check that out. Any way that we could help on that front end, we're pretty good at that. And we just want to learn what the best way you hear, because for us at the end of the day, we're still just trying to get the answers. Like, can you recommend that somebody takes this on or not?
Yes.
How long have you been doing this?
I'm taking it on now, right? So I've been in talks with a bunch of the drone companies and the different things, and that's kind of where we're building it. I built it just because soldiers want a way to get into agriculture, and they don't all have the money to buy a couple 100 acres of land, and they don't know nothing about cattle, but they've been flying drones in the military for years. So this is a way that they can get into agriculture. So I'm kind of helping them do that, but also then it leads into, like you said, if they don't do agriculture, you got your guy that was, QK4 that was going to be here for that. Like, those type of things are all things that we're working on these soldiers doing. But the big thing that I would like to know from you is, like, I saw you looked like a couple of those pictures were DJI Inspires, and it looked like you had a couple matrices. Is that what you guys are using to fly these with?
Man, we're blessed. We have one of everything at least.
Nice.
Yeah,
And
we
then
have it all.
what software have you found? There is a ton of software out there, and it all is a matter of personal preference, I know, but I'm certain at the academia level, you guys have tried and tested a whole bunch of the different softwares before you found like what you think is working best in that. If you wouldn't mind sharing what software you think is working best for that.
So all the drones come, the DJI basically makes a software that kind of goes for every model of drone. And if we're using Pix4D and Drone Deploy to kind of do the orthomosaics. So that's kind of what we teach our students to do the pre-processing to get the products. And then once you move into GIS, we teach our students to use Art Pro. Because that's kind of the industry standard, but it's not free, so that's a problem. My own work, a lot of what I showed you was actually built in R. So R is an open source programming language, and so many fabulous people over the last couple of years have developed these really strong packages where everything that you can do in Art Pro or QGIS, there's an R package that can help you recreate that. And our abilities with R are now past where we're at. So trying to do LiDAR work in Art Pro without an expensive add-on like LP360, it's difficult. It's difficult, but R, and there's one package. You probably know who Martin Eisenberg is, who developed the LAS tools. There was this Canadian team who then worked with Martin to put all of the LiDAR processing capabilities in an R package. So you have LAS strength tools that are freely available using R. And I'd be super happy to share any of that. That's kind of one of, well, let me just say kind of the last thing I was going to cover. We're building an 11-week school that is half designed to get pilots legal and flying and experience with all the different drones. And then the second half of it is welcome to GIS world, to start making the maps, doing the analytical workflows and generating kind of the final maps that you would leave for the farmer or for the forest person. To answer your question, we use all the softwares, but I only try to use what's free. And when it comes to trying to get a farmer up and running, I'm going to show him the free thing. So in R, we kind of built these apps where we have the workflow coded out, and it's just like a nice little, well, a really ugly interface window, but all the user has to do is just kind of point to the data and hit the go button, and then all the products are generated. So whether it's farm or forest, all of these products I've showed you, they're relevant in all the situations. So just kind of every time I'm going to generate all 50 products, but you may only care about the 3. So fine, just look at the 3 that you care about, and you can just ignore everything else. So what the best software is, can't really say. Art Pro is the pro tool, but there's, it costs. And for private folks, it costs even more. So that's why we always try to do in the free stuff.
Right. No, and understanding that, like, definitely want to know the free stuff so you can see what's open source and what's out there. But like, pulling soldiers out of the military, some of these guys have been flying drones in the Army. Some of these guys have been sitting in a cubicle processing ArcGIS map data for bad guys for decades, and now they don't want to do it no more, but they have that skill set. So how can they replace that with something? So those are the guys we're looking to move into our mapping and map data type stuff. The guys that have schoolhouse trained have been doing that for a long time, and then getting the guys that want to fly and building both those pieces out. So definitely be very interesting to talk to you about some of those schoolings you got coming up.
Yep, and we will customize it to fit what you already know is working. So we're, like I said, we're still outside really looking in. So whatever makes the most sense, whatever the farmer guy says is the best is what we ultimately want to do. And all the softwares are all they're all very similar. They each have their strengths, and maybe they focus on one little area or the other. But there's a free way, to do everything. So however we could change it up, we're every good idea that we run across, if people want it, we'll build a day out of it, a lab or a chapter or whatever. So thank you so very much for throwing that up, and we'll talk right away. We want to do that soon, no later than the summer, have people enrolling in the full thing, but we could do workshops before, right? We can get together next week and start doing software stuff if we got a group of folks that are ready. Because like I said, in the past, my main group were the students, but I was recently promoted to state specialist ag tech for small farms, and now my focus is our clientele, so the small farmers, producers, and all the folks that work at these agencies that serve all of those people. We've been to all kind of talks in the last couple months, and everybody has tons of money for equipment, tons of money to train people, tons of money to hire people, but they don't have people to hire, right? They don't have people to hire. They have money for equipment and for training. So that's kind of our first big group that we're setting up. They can afford to pay for the stuff, and they can, fund it so that we can give it to the farmers and producers and, whoever else for cheap or free.
Well, I definitely got soldiers that are wanting to do the work. You say they can't find workers to hire. We're on the other end. We're trying to find the money to put enough drones in their hands to keep them employed. You know what I mean?
So that's my job. That's my job. So let me help you, please. Let me work with you. Perfect. Anybody have any? Mr. Sizemore, do you have something you want to add? I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. So I've got a question. So if can we use those drones, or has anyone tried to use the drones? Let's say to apply something for spotted lanternfly, or hemlock woolly adelgid. Is that would be my first questions.
Mr. Ryan, you have anything to add for that?
I don't know what to apply to those things that he was talking about. So I'm assuming those are things in your orchard, sir?
No, those are pests in the forest. The spotted lanternfly is something that fortunately we don't have in Kentucky right now, but could really, really mess up, especially those of us that tap maple trees, could really make things miserable for us. And then of course the hemlock woolly adelgid is something that's been a problem for quite some time. And so both of these are insect pests in the forest, but I could see something like that.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. So the big issue, it would depend on time of year. So obviously it's got to be something that isn't harming all the trees, and you're trying to get it through the canopy. If you're in full bloom on all your big hardwoods, trying to get through that canopy, you can get through the canopy, you can blow it through there, but how effective is it going to be once it gets in there? So if it's something you could spray in the fall or the off time where the canopy's not as thick, you could get it down in there a little bit better. I would say there's definitely an application where that drone could do it.
Surely any chemical can go in there. So if it makes sense to do it, it's probably just a matter of identifying, what you need and what the best route is to get it sprayed the best time or whatever.
I'm just wondering, a lot of these trees would obviously be dominant in the canopy. So that I don't think would be much of an issue. But not I'm not a forester. I'm a forest owner that spends a lot of time battling pests, and some of them are plants, but you know, like the bush honeysuckle. But then you know, I also, you know, I lose trees to other things, and so that is a concern. The other application that I'm just curious about, if you know of anyone that's done this, is, you know, in an orchard. You know, for me, I'm a small orchard owner, and you know, I do spend some time with a backpack sprayer, but you know, that's a little much. I've got a couple hundred trees, so you know, when I'm in my orchard, I got about 4 acres of apple orchard, and you know, I'm running through there with a you know, a sprayer on an ATV, a side by side or something with a wand, and I'm spraying. Now that's hugely uh, inefficient. But you know, that's what I have, because I don't have a truck that's got this big blower that's doing that. So I'm just curious as to if anyone is using this, or if there would be potential, especially for small orchard owners, to use something like this, you know, in their apple or peach orchards or whatever.
So to answer that is yes, 100% you can use them there. So the T10, the T30, and the T40 are all low volume, right? So these are all made by DJI in China, right? So if you think about the agricultural layout in China, they are much smaller farms, hillier farms, all those things, which is really where these things shine, in being able to, you can set this thing to fly 10 foot off the ground and it will basically follow the contour of the earth all the way around. The other thing they have in China is a lot of orchards. So they are about to come out. I don't know when it's supposed to come out, but they are coming out with what's actually called the T50, which is a 50 liter. And the T40 only has 2 spray nozzles on it. The other, it has 4 rotors. 2 rotors have spray nozzles under it. The other 2 front rotors have antennas underneath them. So they moved those on the T50, and now it has 4 spray nozzles, 50 liter capacity, but it's made to dump a large volume, which is what you're going to put in an orchard. So you're going to put a higher volume on it in an orchard. Now, do I think it would be economically wise for you at you know, your size of farm to spend the money on a T50? Absolutely not. But you could buy a smaller spray drone and just refill it more and be much more efficient on your farm in your area, for sure.
Do you know of anyone that's actually using that here, you know, in Western Kentucky or in Kentucky anywhere?
In Kentucky or Western Kentucky, no. I know are some folks out west that's doing it, where, you know, vineyards is a big place where it would really come into play to put some high volume stuff down, and some orchards and stuff out west, California, Oregon, those kind of places. But I do not know of anyone that's doing it in Kentucky. But I could look into it. I'd be happy to look into it for you.
I'd be interested to know that. Also, you know, I guess, you know, we don't have almond orchards here, but I'm just curious. You know, that would be something that you know, I would think would be very applicable to the almond orchards.
Yeah, definitely the orchard vineyard places out west are super excited about this T50 that's coming out, just because it is a high volume. So the T40, yes, it's low volume, but if I'm only having to spray 2.5 gallons per acre of fungicide on a corn because it's pushing it all the way through, I can spray about 40 acres an hour with that thing. So when you start putting those together, a couple 100 acres a day, you can spray with those. Obviously, it would be much less to slow it way down, to really put more volume through it to do what you would need to do in an orchard. It would be less efficient on those bigger drones, but it could be done. And I would say on a smaller scale orchard, the smaller ones would do just fine if it was just you. I mean, it's way better than you with a backpack sprayer out there. And you're not worried about ingesting near as much of it, because you can be much farther away from it and just fly it over the tops of your trees, you know, kind of the height of your trees. You can kind of see where they're at, and you can really get it close to the top of the tree without having to deal with near as much drift as you do with the big giant fans blowing it up in the tops of the trees. So it would reduce your chemical costs as well.
Oh, great.
Let me just throw out there, there's a guy named Steve Lee at University of Auburn, and he's I think he's mostly an extension professor. He, as far as I can tell, is like the man in the extension and academic world with using this. So he's a little further down south, but just I've seen a lot of his videos and a lot of his talks for recorded conferences and stuff. And he's every project is just like totally different, and he's very knowledgeable about the chemicals and all the novel uses. And so as you're doing your research, check him out. um, I've learned a lot just listening to him go on and on about stuff. um,
Yeah, I've talked to, I've seen some of his stuff, and the company I'm going through with the drones and stuff, they do a lot of work with him. So then we have access to a lot of his academia research and data that he's done as well. So super smart guy, super knowledgeable on it, has been at spray drones, I think, since spray drones. He might have put a spray bottle on a drone 10 years ago and started thinking of this. I don't know, but he is wicked smart on all that stuff.
yeah. All right, cool. All right, I just got one last thing. I think we're just about at the end of the window here. Everything I've showed you so far, this is all drone-based stuff. But remember, the drone, at least on the mapping side, is just a flying camera. So a project that I have some of my students do, if they're not super enthusiastic about drone and map and this or that, and they just kind of need to get some exposure to the outside and do an analysis. I developed a project for him that was actually pretty successful, and we've replicated it a whole bunch of times. You can derive a lot of these same indices just using your phone, even without modification. So you'll recall earlier, I showed you a comparison between an index called VARI, V-A-I-R, V-A-R-I versus the NDVI, and they were very similar. Not as sharp, but very similar. We can apply those same things to just the pictures you take with your phone. So I had the students just go out through the woods and try to, as in a consistent way as possible, take these pictures with their GPS on their phone, and the phone records everything, like the angle, the direction of travel, and all that. And they were able to answer questions about, could you map out the infestation of bush honeysuckle, and does it match, what my maps are saying? So here you see they just, went down the trails and took pictures, and we use the same GIS software, just pull this image in. It's not, 2D bird's eye level, but the software doesn't care. It doesn't know where this is in the world, but it still can, it sees the pixels and it can do math with them. So from regular phone images, you can generate the same images. So that's kind of a map of greenness. That's a slightly different one that I didn't talk about, but it's mostly just looking at what's green. And here you're grouping things according to their spectral similarities. So you see you only have 5 or 6 different things in the image. So all I have to do is kind of label each color once or twice, and then I know every time I see that color, it is also this thing. So look at how well, the live bush honeysuckle mostly jumps out at you. And you can just kind of extract that out. And here I can just count the pixels. So in the scene, if I could roughly estimate how large the area and what the view box is, how many pixels do I have of green stuff? That's an indication of it. And I can just kind of aggregate it. So the students go through, and we just map out all the places they took pictures and put little boxes there. And, for each image, you can basically generate how much green stuff is in it. Careful to make sure that it's roughly this time of the year, like somebody said a little bit earlier, where basically everything that's green out there is pretty much bush honeysuckle. And if it's evergreen, it's generally dark, right? So even though you have 2 things of green, they will consistently be different colors of green. And this is a quantitative measure of how green it is. So low green would be my bush honeysuckle. Dark green would be, whatever kind of wood that is out there. So the point here is just that GPS enabled smartphone, you can do very similar stuff. So if you're eager to get started doing some of what I showed you, you can start with your phone right away, and I could share an app with you that we built that will chew through this. And it has a nice little selector where every index that can be applied, most of them won't be meaningful for your area, but you can still look at, experiment with what they look like. I had one more thing I wanted to add. Yeah. In any case, again, y'all may not know Dr. Gwali, Dr. Booty Gwali. I've worked for him since 2015, up until just this last promotion that I got. He is the busiest guy at KSU. He's got something like $38 million in grants since he's been there in 2010. Since 2015, I've been with him, and that's how I've been able to stay active and do this. Again, it was all in the mission of getting students able to do this kind of work. But the ones that are not National Science Foundation grants, these USDAs, they have real research questions attached to them, and they have these huge outreach components. So that's basically what pays for most of the equipment that we have and pays for all the running around that we do. And it's basically justified in terms of outreach, because whatever I'm learning at your farm, the very next day, I'm going to be talking to somebody just like I am here today, showing all the pictures. Like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's the people who know what's going on. Let me help you, and work together. And this is pretty much what we do, all the time. And then we try to involve students as much as possible in that, because it is a university, and that's really the mission, is to create more people to do this kind of work. A couple of links I have. The only thing I couldn't really find that a lot of people keep asking is, like, what does it cost? What does it cost to what should you charge, or what should one be expected to pay? And Ryan, if you have anything you wanted to share on that, I'm hearing numbers all over the place. There's a lot of young folks who are buying a drone and trying to make a business out of it. But we also know of a bunch of people like QK4 who, when they're sending somebody on site, it's 2 high-dollar engineers and in a truck, and they have $1,500 setup fees, and the numbers are just really, really wild, like really high. So I guess it depends on the context and who's paying. So I really have no idea what this would expect to charge as a service.
So some of them are, so if you're like spraying, doing large acreages, similar to, helicopter or airplane fees, you're charging a by the acre amount. Around here, you're really looking at somewhere in the $15 to $18 an acre range. And then if you're looking at smaller things like a smaller orchard, or spot spraying in an area where charging by the acre doesn't really make sense, it's kind of more like a by the hour thing with a X number of hour minimum, kind of like similar to if you're getting some skid steer work done. It's going to be $150 an hour with a 4-hour minimum. And some of those are based off of what you're doing, because it is so new right now. People can kind of charge whatever they want. Unfortunately, some people try to overcharge for them to learn, and the consumer is not going to quite get the product they're hoping to get, as opposed to charging a little less and learning off of it and getting better at it and building that long-term relationship. So it's just like any other business, really. But the biggest thing from it is the market is so open right now, and it's so wide open of all the things these drones can do, that every day you wake up with a drone, you've come across some other way you can make money with it. So by the acre makes the most sense for larger farms, or if you're doing a X number of acres of spraying, other than that, you're going to kind of look at a by the job, by the hour. You know, in the beginning, you'll probably have to do it by the job, because what should take you 4 hours might take you 6 if you're just getting started. But the, you know, $450 charge for a half a day deal of being out there at the farm and then providing the products, and depending on what they want you to provide and how much computer work's going in the backside of it when you get home, because as you very well know, Jeremy, the 20 minutes you fly the drone is the easy part. It's the next 3 hours you spend in front of the computer trying to peel them layers apart. So depending on how proficient you are with that, you know, whether you got some software that makes it easier that you got a bunch of money wrapped up in, or if you're using some freer stuff that takes a little more effort on your part, but you saved a bunch of money on it, it could take a little longer. And then as you get better with putting those pieces together, your price per, the money you're making per hour increases the longer you do it. In the beginning, you're not making as much per hour because you're learning how to do it. So, but the, you know, a $400 to $450 half day job's not unbearable, because you still got to go out there, you still got to set all the stuff up. And the big thing is the insurances, the insurances and the licensing you got to have. So if you're flying a commercial drone at all, first you have to have a FAA Part 107 license. And then if you're flying hazardous material, you got to have a 137 exemption. If you are flying a drone that weighs over 55 pounds, you got to have a 44807 exemption, which allows you to fly a drone that weighs over 55 pounds. And that's with no material or nothing in it. So if it's going to take off and weigh over 55 pounds, you got to have that 44807 exemption. All of these agricultural spray type drones do. All your mapping drones, they really don't. You can just fly them with the 107 license. And then to fly a spray drone, you also have to have a $1 million insurance policy. So that covers first and third party $1 million crop coverage. So if you're spraying, you know, farmer A's field and you get some drift that goes over into farmer B's field and does something to his crops you didn't want it to, you got to have $1 million policy for each of those. So, and then your liability insurance, it's just kind of like your car insurance, you know, you got to basically have full coverage insurance, for lack of better terms, on the drone. So there's a ton of time and effort and studying. And also in the state of Kentucky, you must go through the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, and you have to get your state applicator license. And then you also have to take, so you have to take Part 1A and you have to take Part 11. Part 1A is your standard crop stuff. And then category 11 is your aerial, for your aerial applicator license. So because they haven't figured the drone thing out completely right now, the Kentucky state licensing that you have to have is the same license the crop duster airplane guy has to have. So there's a bunch of pilot questions on there that you're like, man, I don't know, like that's not me. But so there is a lot of licensing and and then if you're doing the company thing, you have to have as an operator and a dealer, because you're spraying on third party, different applicator license than if you're spraying on your own land. So you do end up wrapping up some time and money and research into getting all the licensing and all the federal exemptions and the federal licensing stuff. But the Part 107, I think it costs you about $175 to take the test. You can find most of the study material online, or you can go to different online places and pay for their curriculum. But for a couple $100, you could have your 107 license, and that would allow you to fly all the mapping stuff like Jeremy was talking about in the beginning, and then decide if getting to the next level was worth it, depending on how much you was going to use it, or it was just going to be better to hire somebody out to come do that with the data that you found out yourself. So a combination of getting your own stuff and using something that's, you know, doing it all myself versus I'm going to do this part myself, know what's going on, and then I'm going to pay somebody to come do these particular things based off of the research I've done myself, is probably a good hybrid.
I know we're out of time, Spence. If anybody wants to get involved, just send them to us. They can come visit, or I'll come visit them. We're going to start the school. As soon as I got a flyer or something, I'm going to share it, and whoever wants to be involved, whatever it takes, we'll work with them.
Yeah, Jeremy, I mean, this is awesome stuff. I really appreciate you joining in to share this with us, and appreciate everybody being so interactive on talking and sharing their own information. You know, Ryan, Jimmy, and all you all. You know, Jeremy, if you all when you get your handout ready to go, if you want to send that over to me, I'd be happy to promote that for you as much as we can on our social media stuff through AgVets and K-Card. So.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, any way I can help anybody, reach out anytime. And Spence, thank you very much for letting me be here today.
Yeah, no, I really do appreciate it. And if you all have any other questions, I know I'm gonna have to jump off here and take care of a couple of things myself, but feel free to reach out to me. I think, did most of you all hear about this from the AgVet newsletter that went around, or how did you all hear about it? Facebook or what?
I got an email.
Okay.
My trusty, reliable Spencer Gwynn reminder the day of.
Nice. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. So if you all got that, feel free to reach out to me, and we can connect you all up if you need to. But thank you all for coming out tonight, listening in. And Jeremy, thank you again. And you all have a good one. Enjoy the nice, well, I would say enjoy the nice weather. It's going to be kind of yucky here in the next couple of days, but
it is. It is.
enjoy what we got.
Mr. Ryan, I'll be reaching out to you, sir, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely. I sent that out there. And there's also, just real quick, I know everybody's in a hurry to get off here, but the CATS program, I know that's the Kentucky University. I don't know if we're speaking bad words in here with Kentucky State around, but the CATS program is the Kentucky Agricultural Trainings and Schools. They are doing, I know they're doing one in Princeton in a couple weeks.
Yep.
I think it's actually the 27th in Princeton, and then they're doing another one up in Lexington that is
29th.
basically an all-day seminar about spray drones. And if you wanted to get into your own business or want to do something, I think there, but there's going to be a demonstration there. I think Caleb Cantor that you said was supposed to be here. I've talked to him a few times, and I think he's supposed to do a demo at those. So it'd be a good learning about it and what it is. And then I know that they also, it's kind of expensive, but they also are offering like a 2-day class where it's like practicing for your 107, and then they take your 107, but it's like $400. You can do it for about 175 in a couple days worth of online, finding some YouTube stuff to get your 107 if getting into the drone thing there's what you want to do.
Yep. Yeah, we'll be there on the 29th in Lexington.
Yeah, I'm not driving that far. I'll probably be at the one in Princeton. I'm gonna go see Caleb at the one in Princeton, but that's about as far as I'm going.
Right.
But all right, thanks guys, appreciate it.
Have a good night. See y'all.
See y'all. Take care.